Well, hey, everybody. Hope your day is off to a good start. Love Tuesday because we're getting right into the meat of the week. Today in our New Testament reading plan, we are in Revelation chapter 12. If chapter 11, which we looked at yesterday, is one of the more difficult chapters to understand, chapter 12 to me is one of my favorite chapters in this book. I love the message in this chapter and a lot of beautiful symbolic language speaking to real life events, and it's just a great chapter. And by the way, in Revelation, we've talked a lot about, do you take all of this as literal? Do you take it as symbolic? And if you take it as both, what's the combination? That's one of the challenges of interpreting the book. And I lean more toward the symbolic side of interpretation. But it's also true that in Revelation, and we talked about this a few days ago, do you believe everything that happens in you is linear, that it starts at the front and goes to the back in a successive historical period, or are there overlaps? Does it kind of go back and forth? And when I read Revelation, it's pretty obvious to me that it tells a story and then it starts over with the different symbols and tells the same story but with more intensity and more detail in the same. So there's a lot of back and forth, none in a linear say January through December fashion. And if you can keep that in mind, that some of these chapters are talking about the same events, but giving you more detail, then that'll help you in understanding it as well. But in this chapter, it's a beautiful picture of the spiritual warfare that's taking place between good and evil, between God and Satan, that is operating behind the scenes, if you will, of human history. And so in verses 1 and 2 and 3, you have this teaching about the nation of Israel and the Messiah, Jesus Christ. The woman clothed with the sun is a way of referring to Israel. The 12 stars going back to Genesis 37 and Joseph's vision and so on. So it's obviously referring to Israel. And she's with a child and she gives birth, and that's the Messiah. Then you have the great dragon, or Satan, and his opposition to God, his opposition to Jesus, his opposition to the church, his opposition to Israel. And at the end of verse 4, the dragon, i.e. Satan, once Israel gives birth to the child, gives birth to the Messiah, Jesus tries to devour, kill, destroy her child. And you remember when Jesus was born, King Herod had his soldiers kill all of those infants and so on. Of course, Jesus had already escaped to Egypt with his parents, but that was an attempt by Satan to destroy the Messiah. Even Calvary, Satan thought he'd won. Jesus was executed and killed. He lost, but he thought he'd won. And so there's all this opposition from Satan, from the dragon, to everything God's trying to do, his redemptive plan to save humanity and Jesus Christ. And then verse 6, and of course, Satan loses because in verse 5, by the way, the male child who will rule all the nations. So it's obviously Jesus. Satan's trying to kill him, but he's called up to heaven. And so after Calvary, Jesus is raised from the dead. He ascends to the Father, and Satan's attempts to destroy Jesus are done with. But in verse 6, the woman flees into the wilderness, a place that God had prepared for her, and she is nourished for this 1,260 days, the 3.5 years, again, the 42 months, the time of evil, the time of pain, the time of suffering, the time of Satan, if you will. And I think of that as referring to the diaspora of Israel, the Jewish people, because shortly after Jesus went back to heaven, the Romans leveled Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and in the centuries that followed, Jews were spread all over the world. And in our modern history, you think about Jews living in Eastern and Western Europe during World War II and suffering at the hands of the Nazis and others. And it wasn't until recent years that Israel existed as a nation again. So she fled into the wilderness during these days of evil, this diaspora of the Jewish people. And in verses 7, Satan or the dragon and Michael the archangel doing wars, this spiritual battle, the dragon trying to deceive the whole world, but in the end he's going to lose. And to me, that's not so much a battle of angels we're going to duke it out, as it is a picture of the spiritual war, the symbolic spiritual war that's going on behind the scenes, and Satan will lose. And the reason I say it's symbolic rather than real fisticuffs between the angels is notice how we win. Okay, notice this in verses 10 and 11. He says, "Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren," who is that? Satan, "has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night, and they overcame." We overcame him, overcame the dragon, overcame the devil, the accuser. How? Because of the blood of the Lamb. Because of the blood of the Lamb, and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. See, we didn't win because God's angels outfought Satan's demons in a fisticuff. There's a spiritual battle, and this picture of the angels, of the dragon's angels and Michael fighting, it's a picture that there was a spiritual battle going on, but we won not through fisticuffs, we won through Jesus. We won through his crucifixion. He says it very clearly, we won through the blood of the Lamb. The other is a picture of that spiritual battle. Jesus' blood gives us victory, but not just that, the word of our testimony. Okay? That we proclaim that we are followers of Jesus. We have a clear testimony, and we stand on that testimony, and we love him. And notice at the end of verse 11, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. Remember Jesus in the Gospels said, if you're going to follow me, you have to take up you have to deny yourself and take up your cross daily and then come after me. Jesus said that if you love this life more than you love him, well, that's what it's saying here. Do you love this life, your life, the things of this life more than you love him? Well, we win because of the blood of Jesus, because we declare our faith in that blood, and we love him more than we love this life, even if it means we have to sacrifice everything, including being martyred for the faith. That's how we win. It's through Jesus and his blood and our commitment to that. Now, you get a true picture of Satan's nature in verse 12, his wrath. He's just angry. And in verses 13 and following, when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth. You see, when Jesus died on that cross and was raised from the dead, Satan knew he lost. That's when the battle was won. And when that happened, he became angry, and in verse 13, persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Well, who's that? Well, some interpreters say it's the church and all of God's... No. The woman is Israel. She gave birth to the child, the male child, the Messiah, who's going to rule the world. And Satan not only persecutes us as Christians, as followers of Christ, but he spent the last 2,000 years persecuting Israel. That's why you have that diaspora, why she had to flee out into the wilderness for the 3.5 years, the 1,200, whatever the number is, days, the time of evil, suffering, pain, and all of that. And so he's persecuting her in verse 13. He persecuted the woman, and it describes that persecution there. But notice in verse 17, so the dragon was enraged with the woman, Israel, and went off to make war with to make war with the rest of her children. Who's the rest of her children? The ones who are born into the family of God through her son, the Messiah. So she gives birth to the Messiah, Jesus. He gives spiritual birth to us. We're the rest of her children, so to speak. And so he persecutes the woman, he persecutes Israel. But in verse 17, the rest of her children who here's how I know it's Christians, who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. We, as believers, hold to the testimony of Jesus. So what has Satan been doing the last 2,000 years? Persecuting the nation of Israel. All you have to do is look at history and see that. And persecuting the believers in Jesus Christ. And that's what he's going to do until the 3.5 years is up, until his time, the time of suffering, the time of hardship, the time of evil ends. And this is really chapter 12, if you will, is kind of a summary of the last 2,000 years. From the birth of Christ up and through today. And the thing I want you to always remember, whatever's going on in life, is remember verse 11. We win because of Jesus' blood, because of our commitment to him and his blood, our testimony that Jesus' blood cleanses us, and our love of him above love of life, that we'll be willing to sacrifice and do anything for Jesus Christ. And that means be faithful. If you find yourself too often putting Jesus kind of over to the side so that you can chase the other things in life, wow, you're making a mistake. Never put Jesus off to the side, brothers and sisters, because there really is a spiritual battle going on out there. And do you know what Satan wants to do? He wants to destroy you. And if you don't keep your eyes and your heart and your life wrapped around Jesus Christ, that's exactly what he will do. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.